Peace remains elusive in South Sudan, and the United Nations is warning of increased violence. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Just a little more than a year after a peace deal was signed between President Salva Kiir's government and an opposition group led by former Vice President Riek Machar, South Sudan faces rising tensions. Machar fled the country this summer, and he's again calling for war. The head of one international monitoring group says the country is worse off today than it was before. We begin with this report from CCTV's Patrick Oyet.
In South Sudan's capital, Juba, it's business as usual. But the impact of July's violence is clear here, and the last thing most people want is another war. However, South Sudan's former First Vice President Riek Machar recently called on opposition forces to again mount armed resistance to the government of President Salva Kiir. South Sudan's government is asking for support from the United Nations and the African Union, but has also come under criticism for trying to block the deployment of thousands more peacekeepers to the region and reportedly obstructing their mission.
Anybody who wants to participate peacefully should renounce violence. And we've also furthered that the region, the IGAD countries and the AU, should observe its rules of establishment, which prohibits any country from supporting rebels against another country.
Aid agencies have warned of a deteriorating humanitarian situation and increase in violence in some parts of the country that had remained calm since the 2013 war. The UN mission in South Sudan says the number of displaced people sheltering in its camps has exceeded 200,000, and restricted humanitarian access to them is vital to their survival.
Unfortunately, there are a number of people who are displaced as a result of the situation, and it is important that the mission is availed maximum freedom of movement consistent with the SOFA that was signed with the government so that it can support the people who are in a needy situation.
The international community is calling on all groups in South Sudan to use dialogue rather than violence to resolve their disputes. China, which contributes a battalion of peacekeepers, says it will continue to support peace efforts.
China has been making its due contribution to South Sudan's peace and stability. China will also be a sincere and a reliable partner of South Sudan in its peace and the development process.
South Sudan's conflict continues to create problems for its neighbors. The UN says there are now more than 1 million South Sudanese refugees in neighboring countries, putting pressure on the resources of those host nations. Patrick Oyet, CCTV, Juba, South Sudan.
Joining us now, Gordon Bui is South Sudan's Ambassador of Consular Affairs for North America. Ambassador, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Anand.
Well, as we've been reporting, the peace talks that took place in Sudan have collapsed. The UN says it's extremely concerned about increased reports of violence in many parts of the country. What is South Sudan doing right now to try and rescue that peace deal?
Well, I wouldn't say that the peace process collapsed because the peace didn't collapse. We have the first Vice President, Gerald Taban Dengai, who was the chief negotiator for SPLM-IO, and the top leadership of the SPLM-IO, most of them are in Juba implementing the peace with the government under President Salva Kiir Mayardit. So that word was used by Dr. Riek Machar. And then for us, we see it as something which is not right because the peace cannot collapse because Dr. Riek Machar is not part of the transitional government of national unity.
But the UN says there is increased violence in the country right now.
No. If you look at the statistics, in Greater Upper Nile region, there's no fighting. In Greater Bahr el Ghazal, there's no fighting. What happened this week, for us, we see it as terrorism because there were only very few individuals who attacked civilian cars. They massacred civilians. So that one is not a full-scale war like a group of armed groups fighting the government. That is not the case in Equatoria right now. It's only small groups of individuals attacking civilian cars. And
so how would you characterize the violence right now?
In Equatoria, I would characterize it as some sort of terrorism because they even killed the Ugandans and Kenyans because they attacked even a Ugandan bus that left Juba for Uganda.
The Vice President, Taban Dengai, traveled to the United States in September. He talked about the threat of sanctions and the possibility of an arms embargo against South Sudan. Let's take a listen to some of what he said.
South Sudan does not need an arms embargo or any sanctions. This is a new nation that has suffered a lot. We have suffered internally. We came from a very long war when Sudan was won. We are only 5 years old. We went into civil war among ourselves for 2.5 years, almost 3 years. We don't need more suffering.
How can your government reassure the international community that there is no need for sanctions, no need for an arms embargo? What's the peace plan here?
Well, we are implementing the peace, as you can see, after Riek Machar left and when Taban Dengai took over as the first vice president, most of the provisions have been implemented. The parliament is reopened, there is a cantonment sites. So this is a reassurance to the international community. On the issue of rapid deployment forces, we in principle accepted that the forces should be deployed, although we initially argued against the number, which was decided without consulting the region. We also accepted that. Our only concern is only on two provisions. Number one, the provision saying that the force should take over the airport and important installations. And number two, our position is that the force that would contribute should not come from an immediate neighbors. It should come from other parts of Africa, because most of our neighbors have interest in the south, so they cannot contribute troops. This is our position.
So you haven't agreed to the deployment of 4,000 more troops. What number are you talking about?
No, we agreed on the number, but we only object two things. Number one, taking over of the airports, and then number two, they should come from other African countries, not our immediate neighbors. This is our position.
Right. There has been a very serious allegation made by the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and it was contained in a leaked letter. He expressed his concerns to South Sudan, in which he said that the country was undermining the deployment of more peacekeeping troops.
No, we are not undermining. We are only, because you remember, in the early August, I think it was August 5th, when the IGAD heads of state met and decided that there has to be an intervention, a protection force, we agreed in principle. And then it was decided by IGAD that the chiefs of staff of the region would meet to decide and work out the mandate. So Resolution 2304 preempted the meeting of the African region, which they should have waited for what the region would have decided on the mandate and the number of forces. But in principle, we accept it. And we are not against 4,000, as even our Council of Ministers decided last week that, yes, we accepted the deployment of 4,000 forces, but we are negotiating with the UN on what they would be doing and which areas they should only be protecting: the relief corridors, the NGOs, and the civilians. But airport is working properly. You don't need to come and take over the airport, which is functioning without any problem. This is where we have some differences, but we are going to resolve them this week with the UN.
Given these concerns that you have, what kind of timetable for the deployment of these extra troops are we talking about now?
Well, it depends on our speed with the United Nations mission in South Sudan negotiation with our technical team. So when we agree that, okay, now these forces should come, and then they have to be deployed in this area and that area, and also the forces, because it is up to the UN to go and find the countries from the rest of Africa that will contribute forces. It is up to the UN. If there are countries ready, anytime, even next week, next month, they can go to the South Sudan, no problem on that.
Well, tell me about the security situation in your country right now.
The security situation, even you can do your research, to me is becoming better than before, because when the war happened after December 2013...
You say better than before, yet you acknowledge that you need 4,000 more peacekeeping troops.
No, 4,000, we don't need them because there's a conflict. It's because the UN already decided that they would deploy them after the incident of July. So we cannot stop them. If they want to come, we said, okay, that's fine. They can come and also contribute to the government efforts of rebuilding.
South Sudan has final say over the deployment of peacekeeping troops, doesn't it?
Yes, but we cannot do anything as a government now, because if we say that, okay, we don't need these forces, they would say, okay, still you are not stable. So we accept it, let them come in. So when they realize that the country is in peace, there's no conflict, and then they will decide to leave, because I think the resolution also has the provision that every year and then it will be reevaluated whether there's a need for forces to stay. So, but for now, if they want to come in, we are ready to receive them.
Now, there's another serious problem that the country faces, and that is the displacement of people. Hundreds of thousands of people displaced by the violence in the country. What about their fate?
Well, they are even now, you can even research the UN sites, and then more than 25,000 left protection of civilian site in Bantu, and they went to their homes. So now our government, the transitional government of national unity, is working on how to provide services to those in UN protection sites to come out, because they cannot come out unless you provide services to them. Some of them, the houses were destroyed. So we have to find clothes, mattresses, blankets, and give to them so that they move to their previous houses. So this one needs a lot of help from the UN and also from international community, countries like China, countries like United States. But they are ready to move because people now realize that the conflict, Juba is peaceful, Malakal is also peaceful. They can move out, but they need a lot of help.
Is your government prepared to re-enter talks with Riek Machar, the opposition leader?
Well, there is Riek Machar. We don't know. Riek Machar was removed by his own group, the SPLM-IO, on July 23rd. It was the political organs of the SPLM-IO that nominated Gerald Taban. So if he has any case, what he should do, he should take his plane, go to Juba, and then meet with the leadership of the SPLM-IO. It is the SPLM-IO that will decide whether Riek Machar would come back to his previous position. It is not the government of South Sudan to decide. This is the internal matter of the SPLM-IO.
Now, your country has a very close relationship with China. As we heard from the Chinese ambassador there, China provides a battalion of peacekeeping troops in South Sudan. What else can China do to bring peace to your country?
Well, we really thank the Chinese help because China invested a lot in South Sudan, not only in oil fields, but they are also helping in health sector. They are helping a lot even in demining, in constructing the South, in addition to the forces. What we want from China is also to help us in other sectors, and also like roads, construction, agriculture, and things like that, and also rebuilding helping also cantonning forces, because now we have no money to canton the forces.
Yes, in fact, you have asked China for $2 billion for the restoration of oil fields as well as construction of roads.
That's right. But the money has not started coming in yet. The China promised that, but we are looking forward to see it in action. Because if they can help us in cantonning forces, because these forces, they need tents, they need houses, drinking water, for you to canton them in different areas. So we don't have money for that, but if China could help, that would be very good.
How seriously has the war hit your economy?
Well, you know that our economy depends on oil. And then when fighting happened after 2013, the oil production came to 130 barrels. It was previously it was 450,000 barrels per day, but after the war, then the Unity State oil field was shut down. Then the production within Upper Nile State came down to 130,000 barrels per day. And then when you couple that with the reduction of oil prices, so we are actually getting nothing because we have to divide it with Sudan. Sudan is taking $24.1 per barrel, because of the agreement we signed in 2012, and then with the oil companies. So basically, we are not getting anything as a government, and that is the only sector that we are getting money.